Well, hi everyone, Sean Humphreys here. Welcome to the Take Charge or Change podcast. Well, in today's podcast, we're going to talk about sleep. I know you've heard it all, but I was going through an article the other day that was really impactful. I mean, some of the science around lack of sleep really created, at least personally for me, renewed motivation to really take this area seriously. So I think you'll enjoy this edition of the podcast. Okay, so the article that I came across the other day was in ladders.com. I'll put a link to that particular article. The article was written by Eric Barker, and Eric Barker talked about the fact that 2/3 of adults fail to get the recommended 8 hours of sleep per night. Now, when I heard that, I thought, what's the big deal? I mean, who does get 8 hours of sleep per night? I know I don't usually. I try to, but it's sometimes hard. There's a lot of reasons for that. So what they looked at was studies where people were consistently getting 6 to 7 hours, and it was really eye-opening. So let me share with you some of the data around the 6 to 7 hour cohort. Well, the first thing they found was just by measuring T cells and taking blood draws is that level of sleep basically destroys your immune system. So if you're getting that much sleep and you're not getting sick somewhat regularly, then you've got great stock. You come from hearty stock. But a lot of people that struggle with, a lack of energy, getting colds all the time, or the flu, or fuzzy brain, or a lack of focus, a lot of it has to do with the fact that their immune systems are compromised. That's lack of sleep. Doubles the risk of cancer. That's kind of a scary stat. It increases the risk of Alzheimer's over your lifetime. And it just disrupts blood sugar, and you're basically leading to a pre-diabetic state. So believe it or not, just a few weeks of sleep deprivation, 6 to 7 hours a night, can put you in a pre-diabetic state. Of course, it can lead to increased cardiovascular disease. It's just in general a real negative cascading of health impacts. The other thing that the article talks about is this notion of hacking our need for sleep. So there's people who think that through drug use or other kinds of hacks that they can get around this need for sleep. And I suspect that there is the odd sleep savant, those people who do not need very much sleep at all, but that's very rare. There's no such thing as training your body not to need sleep. We're just biologically wired for that. So that might work for you for a while, maybe for short periods of time, but there's a cost to doing those things that get in the way of your natural rhythms to seek renewal and rest, and then getting back and being engaged. It's one of those things where most of us can't develop superpowers as much as we'd like to when it comes to sleep. In reality, it's much like, for those of us that are sleep deprived, we're almost like the drunk that's asking for the car keys when clearly they're not in a condition where they should be driving. And we handle sleep often like that. Our lack of sleep, we still think that we can be engaged and cognitively productive and doing all the things we need to do in life, and yet we're just doing it at a lower level of performance because of that compromised aspect of our life. The interesting thing is we spend a lot of time thinking about the impact of alcohol and drugs and their impact on accidents, particularly car accidents. And yet drowsiness is a far greater contributor to car accidents in our society than alcohol and drugs. The National Sleep Center looked at many studies around sleep. They came to the conclusion that 7 to 10 hours of sleep was sort of a range that you should be shooting for. But they also looked at the impact of 10 consecutive days of getting 7 hours of sleep. And the bottom line was your mind becomes mush. And so the recommendation was try to get those 8 hours on a consistent basis over time. In the article, Barker references a book by Matthew Walker, Why We Sleep, Unlocking the Power of Sleep and Dreams. And so some of the things they talked about there was essentially our need for sleep was driven partially by it's a way to essentially inculcate memory and skill development. In other words, when we're trying to learn new things, whatever sphere it is in our life, that sleep plays a necessary ingredient to laying down those patterns in a successful way. So sleep is critical to skill development and memory. Sleep can act as a built-in therapist. So when we're in deep REM sleep and experiencing dreams, those dreams often take the sting out of emotional events that we go through. And so it's a built-in free therapist to help us process those emotional events. Sleep's critical for that. And so when you do not get the necessary rest that you need to process those kinds of things, it can also lead to emotional intelligence being compromised, or ability to be empathic and to deal with people effectively through our workday and at home. If we look at some of the other categories, sleep, this is an interesting one. Sleep cleans out and organizes gray matter. So all through the day we're processing, we're thinking, we're sorting through stuff, and that creates waste material. And when we sleep, our brain is cleaning out that waste material so that when we wake up the next day, we're ready for a new day. And we know anecdotally, or we know from common sense, that's how we feel. You can go to bed overwhelmed by the day's issues and problems and not making progress the way you'd hoped, and then you get up in the morning and it's like you can look at things in a totally different way. Often you wake up and you've got breakthroughs in terms of how to solve the issues that you were struggling with. And so those are just a few things to keep in mind when it comes to sleep. I thought they were great tips and some alarming information about what happens when we don't get enough sleep. So what are some tips for improving sleep? You probably know these. Good to summarize them though. So make sleep consistent. The number one recommendation by sleep experts was to make sure that you've got a sleep schedule and you adhere to it. So if you're going to get 8 hours of sleep, when do you need to go down for the night and when are you going to get up? And try to maintain that schedule as much as possible. It's one of the most important components to good sleep hygiene. The other thing they talked about was blue light isn't the only problem. In other words, we talk about sleep and sleep quality. We talk about getting off technology, whether it's our phones or our tablets or computers, and getting away from the blue light that's emitted by technology, because it can wreck our circadian rhythm. But basically the bottom line is just get all light out of your room. So make it dark, dark, dark. So anything that emits light, try to cover it as much as possible. And if you need to invest in some blackout blinds, make sure you do that as well. You want to make sure it's as dark as possible where you're sleeping. The other thing is try to be cool. So your melatonin, it ebbs and flows based on internal body temperature. So if you want to try to cultivate sleep, you want to make sure that not only is your room dark, but also that your internal body temperature is cool. And you can do that by making sure you're not, covering yourself up, 3 feet deep of, covers. And one of the tips that they talked about was take a really hot bath before you go to bed. It's relaxing, but it also dilates your blood vessels. That encourages the release of your temperature internally, and it's a great way of sort of fostering good sleep hygiene. The other thing about sleep is, exercise can actually help with sleep, but the general recommendation was not to exercise at least 3 hours before your downtime. So it's something important to keep in mind. And then the other thing, of course, no booze, no coffee, no sleeping pills. Now, particularly with booze or alcohol and sleeping pills, is it actually doesn't help you to sleep. It essentially anesthetizes you. So, I guess you kind of fall asleep, a form of sleep, but you don't move into the regular sleep rhythms. That's why a lot of times people, when they drink, they'll fall asleep and then at 2:30 in the morning they're looking up at the ceiling. And so those are not great ways of trying to foster sleep. So get off the alcohol, and if at all possible, sleeping pills. In fact, in that article there's a study that basically confirms that sleeping pills don't work. In terms of coffee, a lot of people know just intuitively, just based on life experience, that they shouldn't drink coffee before they go to bed. Caffeine is the half-life of about 5 to 7 hours. So if I drink a cup of coffee at 7:30 at night, then 50% of the power of the caffeine is still there at 1:30 in the morning. So caffeine is something to be very careful about. So in summary, make sure your room is dark. Make sure you cut down on your temperature. Don't be too warm. Try to be cool. No coffee, no alcohol, no sleeping pills. Ideally, exercise, but don't exercise, for at least 3 hours before you go to sleep. And try to find some other practices that will relax you. Make your room a place of tranquility and relaxation. not a place of watching the news and getting completely overwhelmed by how terrible the world is. So I hope you enjoyed this edition of the Take Charge of Change podcast. You know, at Take Charge of Change, we really think a lot about how we can help organizations build resilience in their teams. We live in a world of constant change and challenges. And so if you lead teams responsible for delivering results in your organization, and you want to find new and novel ways of encouraging your people, equipping your people to be more resilient, more productive, happier both in their workplace and at home, then reach out to us. We'd love to start a conversation with you to explore how we can customize programs to help your organization to be more resilient. You take care.